Welcome back to Animal Science, and this is Unit 14 that we're going to cover in this semester, which will focus on horses, which is chapters 32 and 33 in your textbook. Getting towards the back of the book now on pages 531 to 564 recommended. Reading. On horses, and we know that they've been domesticated for more than 5,000 years, and their role has changed, of course, over the years, basically from we had them for transportation purposes, of course, but then obviously for war, for tillage, for power, for food, whatever it may be. So a number of for horses. Breeds of horses, basically they're categorized into either light horse breeds, and you can follow some of the characteristics of them, or draft or heavy horse breeds. Really large and heavy, powerful horses used for pulling and tillage. Here's a few pictures provided in your textbook. These would all be popular light horse breeds in the United States, and probably the most common one would be the American Quarter Horse. A few more of them in terms of some popular light horse breeds. There's the Thoroughbred on the top left, and the Tennessee Walking Horse, and then one of the heavy horse breeds that you're all very familiar with, the Clydesdale on the bottom left. Vast majority of equine activities in the United States, but a huge focus upon and lots of dollars spent in recreational activities. And I thought this picture was kind of fun to look at. Two cowboys out trail. What's going on? Lots of competitive events and so forth in the equine business that you can get involved in, whether it's showing or athletic competitions, or just simply those ranch working horses. If you look at major U.S. draft light horse and pony breeds based upon registration numbers, you can go through kind of some examples out there in the years that their association was formed, kind of a historical demographic data. When we focus on horse breeding, it's important when we get into talking about the reproductive management here. Sexual maturity varies between light and heavy horse breeds. It's anywhere from 12 to 18 months in those light horse breeds, and 18 to 24 months in the heavier draft horse breeds. They do have the same 21-day estrus cycle that we've somewhat talked about all the way through the class. They do exhibit estrus behavior, though, for about a week long. And ovulation really only occurs during the last 2 days of the estrus cycle. And it's kind of interesting to note, and it's pretty rare to see twinning rates. Their twinning rate in the equine industry is only about half of 1%, but about 10% of the time they have multiple ovulations. So you would assume that there's some disconnect there between the number of fertilizations that occur, or if there are sometimes twins that are fertilized, but that maybe the mama mare or the body detects it and they terminate that pregnancy before anything can happen. Horses have about a 340-day gestation cycle, again, plus or minus a few days, maybe depending on the breed of horses. But it's very interesting that somewhat like sows, mares are going to be ready to breed back about 5 to 12 days after foaling. So if you're into raising foals, that transitional time through foaling is crucially important, as that mare needs to clean and be ready to roll right away again, because they're going to recycle and be ready to be rebred within about a week's time frame, should you choose. So selection should be based upon the desired offspring that you're looking for. One of the differences and divergences that you will see from the previous three species that we've talked about that are very data-oriented, have a lot of information in terms of genetic selection and mating. Here it's a lot still based upon the eye of the beholder and the information that you can collect in terms of what horses look like. Very little data collection here in terms of selection. And if you start selecting for other reasons than what you want in an offspring, you're going to have some unsoundness issues. Ideal environments for breeding programs is going to be a lot of ample pasture for them to get good footing on and good pasture. Horses need ample exercise. They need to stay on a regularly scheduled exercise program to maintain proper body condition. If you don't keep them. If you allow horses to get too fat, they'll have massive problems through the breeding and foaling time, or certainly massive problems if we have a stallion trying to mount a mare, and you'll have big time problems maintaining sound feet and legs. So even pregnant horses, keep them working kind of on a regular exercise schedule. Allow them to keep working and keep in proper body condition. So critical key. A little bit on conformation, and we'll talk real specifically briefly on this slide in terms of purchasing, because of the nature of the recreational aspect of the equine business, it's important if you're going to get into the horse business and you've not really been there before, is know your needs and abilities and purchase a horse that matches what you're going to use it for and what you are capable of using it for. Horses, much like any other animal, there's some that are very, very advanced intelligence, that are much easier going or much harder to get along with, have different dispositions. So be honest with your needs and abilities and what you're going to utilize a horse for before you go out and buy one. Make sure and do a pre-purchase examination that the horse is healthy. It is the age, in fact, which the owner or the seller tells you it is, that they've kept proper records, and hopefully you can come up with a sales contract so that you maybe have some guarantee that if for some reason there something goes haywire as you get the horse home, that you have some kind of cover. Here's the parts of the horse, and just to give you some frame of reference of things that are important. I'm obviously not going to ask you to recite all these, but there's critical things of importance in knowing. If you're going to go and buy one, know those. Conformationally, the feet and legs are the most important functional parts of the horse, and always, always, always observe those things for correctness and soundness. An ideal conformation is listed here, but we should have, in terms of the front side, from the point of the shoulder, a straight line through the center of the knee, the pastern, the cannon, and the foot. Here's a diagram that shows that. So on the left we see ideal position. This is if the horse was straight away looking at you, and you see a line that's drawn right through the shoulder, right through the middle of the upper leg, through that knee, through the cannon bone, which is between the knee and the ankle, and through the middle of the hoof, dividing that evenly half and half. That way their weight is equally distributed from side to side. All these other diagrams to the right of the ideal one on the left, those are all conformational flaws. And anytime you see any of those, it could create stress on the hooves, it could create stress on the rest of the skeletal or muscular structure above that, that's going to cause that horse not only to maybe have problems down the road with soundness, but also oftentimes it won't ride that well. So it's very critical that you are able to evaluate that conformationally looking to buy or sell. Again, from the side angle view here, notice we got a line drawn from the tip of the scapula right through the joint there at the top of the leg, through the front of the knee, and then in the middle of the hoof down at the bottom. That's ideal position. And any of the rest of these, again, all are conformational flaws that hopefully you're able to pick up. And if you have a horse that has one of those, we can breed or select against it, because know that they're going to have potential conformational and soundness issues. This diagram is added to the textbook this time, and I thought it was a fascinating way to kind of also look at this. Now you've taken the horse away and just like we had the footprints as that animal moves. And so again, normal or ideal position on the left, and then some conformational problems to all of the diagrams on the right. And just any of those, know that, again, we're putting different stressors on the foot and leg structure, and also that's going to cause that horse, again, not to ride very comfortably or very smoothly. Here's, again, some deviations from correct conformation, and again, those of you who are really interested in this can review a lot of this and star this page for future reference. That's why I keep providing some of these tables for you from your textbook, because I think a lot of them much improved over previous textbooks in order to help you kind of come back and use. Conformation on the rear end, we should have, again, a rear line from the point of the buttocks through the center of the hock, the cannon, the pastern, and the foot. So to go along with another one. So again, we should be able to draw a line from the back of the buttocks, back that leg straight up and let that horse stand out square. It should go straight down the back of the cannon bone. That's ideal position with that hoof angled at about 50 degrees. And any of these other problems that you have to the right of that ideal position on the left are all going to be conformational flaws that, again, will provide too much stress. If you look behind the horse, again, you should see that straight line dropping down from the buttocks all the way through the middle of those bones, through the middle of that hoof. And any of these other problems, we're going to create varying degrees of stress on the foot, the leg, the muscular structure, and you, the rider, and the owner. The hoof is absolutely critical for soundness of the horse, and so make sure that you maintain that hoof the right way. Keep your stalls and your horse hoof clean. Trim it on a regular basis, and I'm talking every 6 to 8 weeks is really appropriate. Obviously, depending on what you're feeding and the environment that you're in, somewhat will dictate how often that needs to happen. But it's quite important that we keep on a regular trimming schedule. Hooves grow at about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch per month, and so they can get away from you in quite a hurry. Some will ask, is it necessary to shoe them all the time? And that isn't necessarily the case. There's a lot of different preferences out there. If they're just on pasture and the occasional trail riding horse, it simply may not be necessary to shoe them that often. If we're performing in different ways or different fashions, just best thing I can tell you is have a really good farrier that you trust that does a great job handling horse hooves that you can utilize for consultation and advice in terms of when they need shoed and when they really don't. Here's a look at the bottom of the conformation of an ideal hoof, and the parts are identified. And again, main thing I can tell you is maintain that hoof integrity and quality. There's all kinds of things that can develop. You can get abscesses, you can get quarter cracks that will crack up the length of the hoof towards the hairline. All of those can then cause significant problems. Some of them will be recurring problems, and some might be temporary short-term things in which you can have healed over time. But again, can't stress enough, really work with a reputable, highly skilled farrier, and they will help you maintain good quality feet. Here's an illustration of length and slope of the hoof and how it affects maybe how that horse would travel. Again, on the left of the diagram, ideal position and normal foot arc and normal trimming of the toe. On the middle diagram, you see a toe that got trimmed a bit too short, causes that lengthening of the first half of the stride, and how that foot ankle is going to hit the ground is going to then cause that pastern to kind of buckle over and be really tough on the leg. If you get a really long toe in the front and a short heel, that's going to shorten the stride, and it's probably going to put a lot of stress on that ankle and that pastern to maintain integrity over time and make it also, again, difficult for that horse. All right, next thing we need to talk about real quickly is differences between soundness or unsoundness, that is, and blemishes. Unsoundness issues when you're evaluating horses, any defect that interferes with the usefulness of the horse, and that can be caused by simple injury, that can be caused by improper nutrition, which maybe makes the horse too fat, or poor genetics, or poor conformational things. Those are soundness issues. So let's say, for example, you're out considering purchasing a horse, and you identify a horse that maybe has some soundness problems. Steer clear potentially of that horse if you can avoid it, or certainly recognize the soundness issue, because that's a problem that many times won't go away, or it's hard to solve. So soundness issues are really critical in horses. Blemishes, on the other hand, may simply detract from the appearance of the horse and really doesn't affect usefulness. Now, I say that with the sound, I'm sure, as it's coming through on the recording, that blemishes aren't that important. And I will say that's not necessarily true. Both of them can be equally as detractful of the value of the horse, because if you're going to go into the show horse and that horse needs to look a certain way, a blemish, a big scar on the side of the horse where they got tangled in the barbed wire fence or something like that, may basically render that horse not usable if that's a problem. So blemishes are really, really critical. So make sure that you understand soundness and blemish. This diagram again can show you some of the potential unsoundness or blemish problems that may develop. And again, if you're interested in horses, keep this one for future. Can't talk horses without talking about differences in gaits and how they move along, and we'll go through a few of them here. The classic gaits of horses. The first one is just the simple walk, a simple 4-beat gait where each foot is striking the ground independently. It should be very, very nice and smooth as you walk a horse. Shouldn't be very much bounce in the saddle. A trot is a 2-beat gait. Again, I'll pull up some videos in class and we'll show you some of these if you're not familiar with horse gaits. But a 2-beat gait is diagonal, where the left front and the right rear hit the ground at the same time. And conversely then, as they go into the next stride, the right front and the left rear will hit the ground at the same exact time. So if we have proper conformation, we have no soundness issues, properly maintained feet, that animal should travel very, very straight with no swaying from side to side. And again, you should see the rider move very, very smoothly. Like a good way to evaluate a rider in the saddle is watch the tip of their head, their cowboy hat, and if it hardly ever moves, that horse is riding very, very smooth. The pace gait is a 2-beat gait as well. It's a lateral gait, so both lefts are hitting at the same time and both rights are hitting at the same time. So that you will see swaying from side to side on a pace gait. And this is where you see the racing horses at the local county fair that get out and get going, that you can go bet the ponies on. That's kind of fun to do occasionally. Those are pacers. The gallop is a 4-beat gait. It's very, very fast, and whenever you see a full-on gallop, if you catch pictures of that horse in motion, you'll actually find times where those thoroughbreds, for example, think about them running in the Kentucky Derby that are in the full gallop. They'll be 100% off the ground at different points in time as both the front feet and the back feet kind of come together. So it's fascinating to watch them in slow motion, the athletic. The canter is a 3-beat gait used in showing. The two diagonals hit at the same time, and the other hind leg and the lead leg hit at a little bit different times. So used oftentimes in the show arena. The rack gait is a 4-beat one used for showing purposes. Think standard breds or Tennessee walkers do a little bit of a rack gait. It's very fancy, and they'll like high step with their front legs. And again, I'll show you some videos. Tennessee walkers and a few other ones do like a running walk. It's like it's a real fast ground walk. So you actually see the rear legs kind of overstep the front footprint by a foot to a foot. Interesting to watch. One of the concepts that your textbook likes to talk about here is ease of riding, or the way of going of a horse, is how they put it. Horses have very, very natural shock absorbers built into their feet and their legs and up into the top end of their skeleton. And any abnormality can cause all kinds of problems, whether it's what we call interference or paddling or overreaching or forging. If you go back to some of the diagrams that I showed you, you can see maybe why those might be really difficult things. And some of them aren't that critical in terms of as you get in the saddle and ride, and some of them are actually really dangerous. So if you had a horse that has an overreaching problem where that hind foot may hit the front heel, that might cause that horse to stumble, and they'd be very rough riding in the saddle, and that's something that you would want to be aware of, again, as a horse. Determining age is always done with inspection of the teeth, and make sure you notice the wear order of the teeth. They should have a full mouth at about 5 years of age here that can show you. And part of the reason the textbook throws this in here is it has been known on occasion that a horse is presented for sale and told to a potential buyer that they are a certain age, and if you study their teeth, they're actually quite a bit older than what they say that they are. And so you as a potential horse owner know that, just know what a normal mouth of teeth should look like. And it gives you a couple slide examples here of what those should be. So again, if you're interested, star those diagrams, those may be helpful. From a feeds and feeding perspective, horses, again, if you remember back to the nutrition unit, they need both forages and concentrate, and forages and high quality forages at that are the foundation basis of a good quality ration and a good, nicely priced ration for you. The mechanical action of chewing, they do a lot of chewing in their when horses consume feed. Remember, they don't regurgitate food like what a ruminant does. They won't chew their cud. Horses, in fact, cannot regurgitate at all. They cannot vomit like you and I. They only have one-way peristaltic movement. So they must chew, 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 and reduce the particle size of the hay or grass or the oats that they're consuming and get it small enough to get down in the stomach and then pass through the rest of the digestive tract. It's really not that necessary to do a lot of cracking or rolling and processing of horse feeds until you have potentially older horses that have lost some teeth, or really young horses that don't have a full mouth yet. They will do a pretty darn good job of cracking that themselves. Now, you'll find a lot of horse owners that buy rolled oats or buy processed feeds, and as much as anything, that puts their mind at ease that they've bought a better quality, better, more digestible feed, and that's the only reason to do it, is to have already increased. The stomach of the horse is only about 10% of the total digestive capacity. Really, the bulk of it is hind gut digestion, and back there in the cecum is a really important component of the anatomy of the digestive tract of the horse. About 60 to 70% of the protein that a horse consumes is of protein, and the soluble carbohydrates are digested actually in the small intestine, and about 80% of the fiber is digested in the colon. So that accounts for about 60% of the digestive capacity back. Again, when we talk about evaluating feeding programs, and what hammered the concept of body condition scoring, be very, very, very careful to monitor that even with your horses. And you'll notice here a horse that it's a little bit thin. You can see the ribs on this horse. You can see maybe not as much cover on the rear end of this horse. Make sure that you're providing proper nutrition and then evaluating that horse for proper body condition. This would be a horse is probably he's not gotten quite enough nutrients out there. Maybe there's not enough pasture grass, or maybe he's not gotten quite enough grain. That's been stressed a little bit potentially. Maybe he has gastrointestinal worms or something like that bothering him. So be aware and evaluate your feeding program appropriately so you have a horse in proper body condition. Here's where you would evaluate that: along the neck, over the top of the withers. Obviously, we already talked about the ribs, but they should have a nice little crease down the top of their back and a nice rounded tailhead area. That would be about body condition 5 on horses. Again, mares, you want to keep them in that body condition 4 range, especially if they're pregnant mares going to foal. You don't want them too fat. If you get horses up in that 7, 8, and 9 body condition, they can be really difficult. Number one, if you're having any performance issues, that's a lot of extra weight on their hooves to cause soundness problems. And number two, if you get on and ride a horse that's excessively fat, it's not very comfortable. And trust me, I've done that. So monitor body condition. One of the challenges with horses is borderline pets and a lot more recreational is horse owners tend to feed them treats and overfeed them a little bit because it's fun, and they're really friendly animals, and you have to be really cautious to get settled on a feeding program and stick to it, and not feed horses a lot of extra things just because you feel like spoiling them a little bit. It's extremely critical that you avoid overfeeding and obesity. That's really a problem. Lactating mares, again, like all other lactating animals, have the highest nutritional requirement of any horse, so you really need to support them with some additional protein and energy and monitor how they're getting along. Evaluate feeds, and again, I can't stress enough the importance of quality testing your hay. Carefully monitor it for quality, maturity, aroma, color, and texture. Again, I say test it if possible. I would really stress that as important, but avoid hay that's excessively dusty. If it's got any hint of mold or must in it, that's likely to cause colic in horses. Don't go there because you're going to really experience some health issues. So evaluate your feed. Colic, I just cited that as basically the main digestive disorder and probably the number one disease in horses that wouldn't be something respiratory or in nature. But severe abdominal pain, and it happens whenever we develop gas somewhere in the gastrointestinal tract, that then the gut will stop moving along. And it might be associated with parasites or ulcers or some twist. Maybe they've ingested a lot of sand or ate a lot of shavings or something like that for some particular reason. But basically the gut will stop moving. And frankly, abrupt diet changes or a big change in exercise regimen or simply a change in housing, trailering them, sometimes will induce colic. It's really an anomaly that we don't always know what's going on, but it's an accumulation of gas somewhere in the GI tract. It might be in the stomach, and it's most generally in the small intestine. But because horses don't have reverse peristalsis, they can't burp. So that gas bubble has to either be dissolved or has to go down the back end of the horse. So when you see signs of colic, just like babies, they'll roll around and kind of be uncomfortable whenever they get colic. Horses will paw at the ground. They'll sometimes kick at their stomach. They'll pace around the stall or pace around the pasture. And if you see horses that you suspect may be beginning the signs of colic and they get down and roll, that's really bad. Because that will actually twist up their guts potentially, and you could have a major problem on your hands at that point in time. So if you suspect that you have a horse coming on with colic, get a hold of them and keep them walking. Just simply the consistency of moving them around might help break that gas bubble loose and move it on down the digestive tract, and keep them walking until such time as a veterinarian can get there and help you with it. There's a lot of different treatments, but again, most importantly, I'd say get a veterinarian on the farm and have them help you with that horse, because you don't want to get into a situation where you potentially have a surgery on your hands or an extremely sick horse. Some management steps to colic here. Again, I thought another good diagram or good table that your textbook provides that, again, you horse owners can star this one and keep it for you. Percent of operations, horses and type of enterprise in the U.S., whether they're small, medium, or large herds, and they classify a large herd of horses as more than 19 head, and kind of interesting, but there's a varying number of those. Managing horses in terms of breeding is always beware of uterine problems at foaling time. Different from beef cattle or dairy cattle, whenever we may have the issue of what we call retained placenta, where a cow maybe doesn't what we call clean those fetal membranes out right away. That's very critical. In a horse, if they don't clean within about 30 minutes, you've got, again, a real problem on your hands. So make sure there's no uterine problems at the foaling time. You can check to see if a mare is in heat just by simply exposing them to a stallion, and 9 times out of 10, a stallion and a mare don't get along very well. Only whenever a mare is coming into heat are they very receptive to playing nice with the stallion. So make sure that if you're going to go ahead and service that stallion, that cleanliness is vital, both of the mare and the stallion, so you don't have any disease coming on. Stallion use, if you're into breeding and you have a stud that stands at your farm, you're going to breed about days 1, 3, and 5. Stallions can service twice a day for a short period of time, or maybe once a day for a couple months. But again, monitor body condition, because if you get those horses, those studs too thin, they're not going to be able to maintain semen quality and concentration. AI, again, can help with stallion management and mating programs. Remember back to the repro section, not a lot of, not highly accepted, I would say. It has to be used basically fresh, because horse semen doesn't store. Normal foaling time is many times in the spring, and this is about the only time that you will find horse owners that use straw in their barn or box stalls. Because it's a little bit warmer and not as dusty as sawdust, that's about the only time, like I say, that you'll see horse owners use straw, at least normally. Normal presentation, again, front, feet, and head, just like most any other ones. And anytime you begin to detect an abnormal presentation, it's probably most likely a call to the veterinarian would be a great move for you as a horse owner. Again, normal presentation delivery, like you see here. You've seen a similar picture already, as well as this similar diagram. Again, monitor foals right away after birth. Make sure that those nostrils are clean and clear and free of mucus and membranes for the front of them. If it's cold outside, get those guys dry. If you have to go with a heat lamp or a blanket of some kind, get them dry. So there's very little brown fat, that we call it, on all young, but they'll burn that right away trying to stay warm. Get the umbilical cord dipped in iodine always, and then keep the mares exercising. That will help as well. When you wean and we get foals to weaning time, just remove the mare, and then we have to ensure some safety for each of the animals, because if you ever watch a mare and a young foal, they're very rarely separated by more than a few feet. Baby foal sticks pretty darn close to mama mare almost all the time, and mama mare knows where baby foal is at almost all the time. So when you go to weaning time, it's a great idea to either leave the foal in the box stall and put the mare out in the pasture and really pretty well away from those foals, or put the foal in a nice secured fenced lot to where they can't get all bound up into something, and leave the mare in the box stall to where they can't hurt themselves. And you'll hear them making all kinds of noise, whinnying at each other in order to try and locate where the problem is, where each other are at, and they will hurt themselves trying to get back to one another. So make sure that you keep each one of them safe, because that's a kind of a stressful time, obviously, for both of them. Always make sure you have high quality hay and some concentrate provided at weaning time. The last thing that you want to do is get a weaning foal sick. Castration, if you're not going to use a stud for breeding purposes, it's absolutely essential that you castrate them. Stallions have a much different temperament. They're a lot ornerier. They're a lot more dangerous than a gelding. So if you don't plan on doing anything in terms of breeding with that stud, plan on castrating them at some time. And I wouldn't do it exactly right at weaning time. There's just too much stress that you would compound on top of weaning if you do it right at weaning time. So I would wait a little bit after that foal is weaned. You get him along a little bit farther to where he's kind of on his own and free and clear of any stressors, and then go ahead and have him castrated. But it's much safer to handle a gelding than a stallion. It's much safer for you, the owner, or any kids that may be around, and much safer when you get them around other horses and so forth. Identification of horses is done primarily through either tattooing or freeze or hot iron branding, or maybe electronic implants. Notice you'll basically never see an ear tag in a horse. It's the one thing that proper care and working of management of horses, just like you and I when we go and exercise. Well, maybe you, but not so much me. A proper warm-up time for them to get stretched out, and then go through their exercise regimen, if that's trail riding or jumping or working cattle or whatever it might be. And then, just like you should do at the end, is recommended a proper cool down work period for them to kind of cool down nicely. And then be very careful that you don't allow them to go right into eating or right into drinking a whole bunch of water. That can, either one of them, cause colic or founder or both. So you have to make sure that you manage those two things very, very carefully. If you're working horses really, really hard, you're going to have to provide a little bit extra energy, but make sure that you do it in a careful way so that you don't founder them. And foundering is a situation where you provide too much energy, which actually softens the hooves and makes them have hoof problems and be like their feet hurt them almost. So be too much additional energy that causes them to break down. Housing and equipment. Make sure when you design your stalls in your barn that you consider the drainage of the facility, so urine and spilled water gets away, that it's accessible. They're almost always going to be labor intensive, but try and keep it as easy as possible. They're durable. You have good quality ventilation. I've been in some horse barns that are too buttoned up, and the urine stench is just permeating you. And so make sure that you have proper air quality and air exchange in the building. And then we can keep exposure to the elements at a minimum whenever it gets excessively hot or cold. It's most often recommended to place the hay rack at head height. I'm not exactly sure of the reason for that your textbook always seems to keep that in there, because I've seen plenty of producers throw hay right on the ground. They eat grass right off the ground. I guess the idea is generally when they're picking pasture grass off the ground, they're not going to eat right out of any poop. So same thing with putting the hay rack up on the wall. It's a little bit cleaner. Grain feeding in a separate location and the water bucket on the outside wall is recommended, simply because if they do spill, then it goes out to underneath the barn and outside. But you'll find oftentimes folks will put the water bucket on the inside wall because they can reach it easier. Stall size, if you've got just a regular standard horse, a 10 by 10 will pretty well do it, though you see a lot of stalls sized at 12 by 12. Folding stalls should be a little bit bigger at something like 14 by 15. Oftentimes in a horse facility, you'll see a tack room in there, and necessary for storage and care of your equipment, your saddles and so forth. You want to make sure that leather doesn't dry out, or the vinyl doesn't get bad on it. You keep it good and protected. Keep your reins and your harnesses and your bridles and all of that equipment that you spend quite a bit of money on in proper condition. So a tack room and a feed storage is pretty important. When you talk about larger operations, you might think about installing what they call a stock. That's a kind of a management rail that you can put a horse in, that you have some boards or posts strategically positioned so that if you do go to palpating or providing injections or breeding a mare, that you have some protection for the handler, that they can't rear up as easy or they can't reach back and kick the snot out of you. It's a protection both for you and the horse. Controlling disease and parasites. Clearly sanitation is the #1 preventative step here. Keep your stalls clean and keep your horses clean. That will help keep your pastures clean. Always work with a veterinarian here on selecting different dewormers or selecting different antibiotics and what you might need to use for vaccines and so forth. Bacterial infections that you might encounter. Tetanus. Horses out on pasture get into a variety of things, and old rusty barbed wire fence or old rusty nails or something like that were in the fence. So you have to be careful of that, and they can get into a number of different be ready for. Viral infections like influenza or West Nile virus was a common issue for a while that you saw a lot of people vaccinating for, but be aware that those. And bottom line is parasites, because horses have both top and bottom teeth and they can clip right basically to the dirt line. Parasite eggs tend to hang out just right at the dirt line, so they are at quite a bit of potential risk to consume parasite eggs. And so you have to deworm on a regular basis in order to not only keep your horse free of any of those parasitic problems, but also keep your pastures free of it. And keep on a regular. Recommend that you alternate dewormers so that you don't get any. Make sure that you avoid any resistance or tolerance or maybe you get different types of worms. But that should be done every at least twice a year, maybe in the spring when horses tend to go out on pasture, and fall when horses come in from pasture, or do it quarterly, and that's probably the more common. Important records to keep on individual horses. I'd always keep vaccination and parasite control, deworming records, any disease or injury. That will help you if you get into selling horses. That's something that buyers would often ask for. At least I would if I was a buyer. What kind of records you have? Can you show me? Because that tells me not only about the horse, that also tells me about how they've been treated and taken care of. A little bit on different incidence rates of diseases and disorders in horses, and again, a good reference slide that you're. Same thing with mortality rate. What can cause certain problems, and about 30% of horses older than 6 months just simply die of old age. There's a lot of other things that come into play, but 15% of colic, you'll see a little bit of that in there as well. Some take-home messages when we look again in the U.S., recreation is the major component of the horse industry, whether that's showing or roping or rodeo or whatever it might be, all recreational components. For you, a horse owner, understand your uses and abilities and needs when managing horses. What are you gonna do with that horse whenever you get him home? Focus on proper feeding programs and prevent health issues, and don't get, like I said, too wrapped up into expensive high-end feeds. Some of those aren't really necessary depending on what you're doing with a horse, but absolutely maintain proper foot and leg soundness and stay on a regular deworming schedule. And I didn't add on here, but make sure you have a really good quality farrier. So I look forward to talking with you in class about horses.